An unsettling silence hangs over a 2,000-year-old question, a schism that has shaped empires, defined nations, and drawn a stark line in the sands of faith. It's a question that goes far beyond simple doctrinal disagreement, touching the very core of identity, prophecy, and the interpretation of a divine promise. We often hear the story told from one perspective, a narrative so dominant it has become the default for much of Western civilization. But what if we were to turn the page and read from a text that has been preserved with meticulous care for millennia? What if we were to step into a synagogue, not a church, to understand one of history's most profound and persistent rejections? The vast majority of the world's monotheistic believers have centered their faith around a single figure from Nazareth. Yet, the very people from whom this figure emerged, the keepers of the prophecies he was said to fulfill, have overwhelmingly, consistently, and resolutely said no. This isn't a story of stubbornness or a lack of understanding. It is a story of fidelity to a different set of divine blueprints, a different understanding of the Messiah's role, and a different vision for the redemption of the world. The Jewish rejection of Jesus is not an absence of belief, but a powerful affirmation of their own. We are about to delve into the heart of this ancient divergence, to explore the theological bedrock upon which Jewish faith stands, and to understand, from their perspective, the true reasons why they do not accept Jesus as the Messiah. If you find yourself intrigued by the depth of this historical and theological journey, and you believe in the importance of understanding different perspectives to grasp the full picture of human history and faith, then take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to help us reach more curious minds, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you don't miss out on our future explorations into the most compelling questions of our past. To comprehend this profound disagreement, we must first transport ourselves back in time, to an era saturated with messianic expectation. The land of Judea, under the oppressive boot of the Roman Empire, was a pressure cooker of political turmoil and fervent religious hope. The Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, were not just ancient texts. They were a living, breathing guide, a source of comfort, and a promise of imminent redemption. Within these scrolls lay the detailed prophecies of a future Redeemer, the Mashiach, a term that literally means the Anointed One. This figure was to be a human leader, a descendant of King David, who would usher in a new era for Israel and the entire world. The criteria for identifying this Messiah were not vague or open to broad interpretation. They were specific, tangible, and world-altering. The prophets, from Isaiah to Jeremiah, from Ezekiel to Micah, painted a consistent and magnificent picture of what this messianic age would look like. It would be a time of universal peace, where nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. It would be an age of universal knowledge of God, when the divine presence would be felt by all of humanity, and the entire world would turn to worship the one true God in Jerusalem. The exiles of Israel would be gathered from the four corners of the earth and returned to their ancestral homeland. A grand temple would be rebuilt in Jerusalem, becoming a house of prayer for all nations. There would be an end to all forms of idolatry, injustice, and oppression. This wasn't merely a spiritual transformation. It was a complete political and physical restoration of the world to a state of perfect harmony and divine order. This was the blueprint, the non-negotiable checklist against which all potential messianic candidates would be measured. It was into this world of precise and grandiose expectations that Jesus of Nazareth was born. The central pillar of the Jewish refusal to accept Jesus as the Messiah rests upon this very blueprint. From the Jewish perspective, the life of Jesus, as documented in the New Testament, simply does not align with the foundational prophecies laid out in the Tanakh. The core mission of the Messiah was to bring about the Messianic age in its entirety, here on earth. Jewish belief holds that the prophecies are literal, not allegorical or spiritualized. When the prophets spoke of peace, they meant the cessation of all war. When they spoke of the ingathering of exiles, they meant the physical return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. When they spoke of rebuilding the temple, they meant a physical structure in Jerusalem. Jesus, for all the profound impact of his teachings and the devotion he inspired, did not accomplish any of these key messianic tasks. During his lifetime and in the 2 millennia since his death, war has not ceased. In fact, some of the most brutal wars in human history have been waged in his name. The Jewish people were not gathered from their exile. Instead, shortly after his death, they suffered the catastrophic destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE, and were scattered across the globe in a diaspora that would last for nearly 2,000 years. The world did not turn to the universal knowledge of the one God of Israel. On the contrary, new religions emerged, creating further divisions. Oppression, hunger, and disease did not vanish. The world, from a Jewish standpoint, remained just as broken and unredeemed as it was before he came. The Christian concept of a second coming, where Jesus will return to fulfill these remaining prophecies, is seen within Judaism as a posthumous reinterpretation, a way to explain the failure to meet the original, essential criteria during his lifetime. In Jewish thought, the Messiah is a one-act show. He comes and he successfully transforms the world. There is no scriptural basis in the Hebrew Bible for a Messiah who comes, fails to complete the mission, and promises to return to finish the job later. The Messianic age is a singular, transformative event, not a process spanning millennia and 2 separate appearances. Beyond the unfulfilled prophecies of a transformed world, Jewish theology fundamentally conflicts with the core tenets of Christianity regarding the nature of God and the Messiah himself. Perhaps the most significant and insurmountable of these differences is the Christian concept of the Trinity. The foundational prayer of Judaism, the Shema Yisrael, declares, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." This declaration of God's absolute and indivisible unity is the bedrock of Jewish monotheism. The idea of God as a triune being, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is viewed not as a complex that God could become a man, be but born as a clear of a woman, departure from it, walk the earth and die on a cross is utterly foreign and incompatible with the Jewish understanding of a transcendent, incorporeal deity. In Judaism, God has no physical form, no partners, and no intermediaries are required to approach him. The worship of any man as God is considered idolatry, the most serious sin in Jewish law. Consequently, the deification of Jesus is a red line seen as Jewish theology cannot cross. A first-century Jewish teacher and preacher, perhaps even a prophet, but not as divine. The Christian concept of Jesus as the Son of God is also problematic. While the term Son of God is used in the Tanakh, it is typically a metaphor to describe the Jewish people as a whole, or righteous individuals and kings who have a special relationship with the divine. It never implies a literal or ontological sonship. The idea of God having a physical offspring who is himself divine is a concept that Judaism firmly rejects. Furthermore, the Jewish concept of the Messiah is strictly that of a mortal human being. The Mashiach, as foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures, will be a great political and spiritual leader, a brilliant scholar of Jewish law, and a righteous judge. He will be born of human parents, live a normal human life, and be a direct descendant of King David through the line of his son Solomon. This genealogical requirement is of paramount importance. According to Jewish tradition, tribal lineage is passed down through the father. The New Testament, however, presents a significant problem in this regard. While it offers 2 different genealogies for Jesus through his father Joseph in Matthew and Luke, it also maintains the doctrine of the virgin birth, stating that Jesus was not Joseph's biological son. From a Jewish legal perspective, this would disqualify him from being a descendant of David and, therefore, from being the Messiah. If he has no human father, he cannot claim the patrilineal heritage required for the messianic throne. This is not a minor technicality. It is a fundamental qualification that cannot be overlooked. The Messiah is to be the King of the Jews, and the right to that throne is inherited through the bloodline of David. Without this lineage, a candidate is simply not viable, no matter how great his teachings or how profound his spiritual influence might be. Another cornerstone of Jewish faith that clashes directly with Christian doctrine is the eternal and immutable nature of the Torah. For Jews, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is God's direct and final revelation to humanity. It was given to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and its laws, the 617 mitzvot, are considered binding. Books and other writings of the Tanakh are revered, but they do not supersede the authority of the Torah. Judaism posits that the divine law is perfect and complete and will never be changed or replaced. This belief is central to the covenant between God and Israel. Christianity, on the other hand, preaches that Jesus' coming established a new covenant, or a New Testament, which supersedes the Old Covenant of Sinai. From the Jewish perspective, this is a theological impossibility. The prophet Jeremiah speaks of a new covenant, but he describes it as a time when God's law will be written upon the hearts of the Jewish people, not a time when the law itself will be abrogated. It is seen as a covenant of renewed commitment to the existing Torah, not its replacement. Paul's teachings, which form a significant part of Christian theology, that salvation is achieved through faith in Jesus rather than observance of the Torah's commandments, are therefore in direct opposition to thousands of years of Jewish belief and practice. For Judaism, living a righteous life is intrinsically linked to following God's commandments as laid out in the Torah. The idea that these laws have been rendered obsolete or fulfilled by a single individual's life and death undermines the very foundation of the Jewish relationship with God. This concept of a new law replacing the old one is seen as a direct contradiction of the Torah itself, which states explicitly that its commandments are for all generations as an eternal statute. The interpretation of key scriptural passages also forms a significant chasm between the two Christian faiths. Theologians have long pointed to specific verses in the Hebrew Bible as clear prophecies of Jesus. However, Jewish scholars read these same verses within their original context and arrive at vastly different conclusions. Perhaps the most famous example is Isaiah chapter 53, which describes a suffering servant. Christianity has long interpreted this passage as a detailed prophecy of the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. For Jews, however, this interpretation is problematic for several reasons. Firstly, the entire context of the book of Isaiah suggests that the servant is often a collective noun referring to the nation of Israel. Throughout the preceding chapters, Israel is repeatedly called God's servant. The suffering described in chapter 53, being despised, rejected, and persecuted, is seen as a powerful allegory for the collective suffering of the Jewish people throughout their long and often painful history in exile. They have been a light unto the nations, while simultaneously bearing the scorn and persecution of those nations. Secondly, the passage states that the servant's days will be prolonged, and he will see his offspring, which does not align with the narrative of Jesus, who was executed in his early 30s and had no children. Another widely cited proof text is Isaiah 7:14, which in Christian Bibles is often translated as, "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son." The Hebrew word used, alma, however, does not mean virgin. It simply means a young woman. Read in its historical context, refers to a specific sign given to King Ahaz in the 8th century BCE, concerning a young woman who was then present and would soon have a child, as a sign of the king's impending deliverance from his enemies. It is seen by Jewish scholars as a prophecy that had a specific, immediate fulfillment, not a long-range prediction of a miraculous birth centuries later. Countless other examples exist where verses are lifted out of their literary and historical context by Christian interpreters to support claims about Jesus, while Jewish readings maintain a focus on the original meaning and intent of the text within the framework of the Tanakh as a whole. The historical development of early Christianity also played a crucial role in cementing the divergence from Judaism. Initially, the followers of Jesus were a small sect within the broader landscape of Second Temple Judaism. They were Jews who believed that another Jew, Jesus, was the Messiah. However, as the movement sought to expand beyond the Jewish community and attract Gentile converts, its theology began to shift dramatically. The key figure in this transformation was Paul of Tarsus. Paul, who had never met Jesus during his lifetime, articulated a new theology that significantly lowered the barrier to entry for non-Jews. He argued that Gentiles did not need to convert to Judaism, which would involve circumcision and adherence to the full body of Jewish law, including dietary restrictions, to become followers of Christ. This was a radical departure from the practice of the Jerusalem church led by James, the brother of Jesus, which still saw the movement as intrinsically Jewish. Paul's successful mission to the Gentiles fundamentally changed the demographic and theological character of the nascent Christian movement. Over time, the Gentile followers vastly outnumbered the Jewish ones. As the church became increasingly Gentile, it began to define itself in opposition to Judaism. Theological doctrines that were foreign to Jewish thought, such as the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus, became central tenets. The Old Testament was reinterpreted as a book that merely foreshadowed the coming of Jesus, and Judaism was increasingly portrayed as a legalistic and superseded religion that had failed to recognize its own Messiah. This parting of the ways was not a single event, but a gradual process of separation, often marked by bitter polemics and competition. By the 4th century, when Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire, the theological separation was complete and had acquired the force of political power, leading to centuries of tragic persecution of Jewish communities living in Christian lands. In essence, the Jewish rejection of Jesus is not born of a single issue, but is a comprehensive and deeply rooted theological position based on a consistent reading of their own sacred texts. It is based on the fact that Jesus did not fulfill the literal, world-altering prophecies of the Messiah, such as ushering in an era of global peace and divine knowledge. It is based on the fundamental conflict between the Christian deification of Jesus and the absolute, indivisible unity of God that is the core of Jewish monotheism. It is founded on the immutable nature of the Torah, which Judaism believes is God's eternal law, not a temporary covenant to be replaced. It is rooted in Jesus' failure to meet key personal qualifications for the Messiah, such as being a patrilineal descendant of King David. Finally, it is supported by a contextual reading of the Hebrew Scriptures that does not see the proof texts of Christianity as valid prophecies of Jesus. For the Jewish people, the story of redemption is not yet complete. They still await the coming of the promised Messiah, a human leader who will fulfill the ancient prophecies in their entirety, redeem the world from its brokenness, and bring all of humanity to a true and universal knowledge of the one God. This is not a rejection of a person as much as it is an affirmation of a promise, a steadfast holding to a blueprint for redemption that, from their perspective, has not yet been realized. The long-awaited Mashiach will not require faith to be recognized. His accomplishments will be self-evident, transforming the very fabric of global reality into the harmonious world envisioned by the prophets of Israel.